What is up everyone, it's Saber here and welcome to another Naruto What If. If you end up liking the video, please consider subscribing. It's free and you can take it back at any time and it really helps me out, and this is my third channel, so if you want some more what ifs, go check out my other channels. And with all of the YouTube formalities out of the way, let's get into it. Naruto stared aimlessly, finding them cowering beneath his power. The 100 were brutally slaughtered by 20. The prince lifted his helm and wiped the blood from his blade. He held his smirk when he caught sight of Lord Randall glaring at him from a distance. The prince made sure that the Lord knew what was coming for him. He released a powerful roar reminiscent of a lion protecting its pride. Silent orders were quickly given as clones dispersed, shooting off through the hills, disappearing almost instantly, but that was his clone's job. All Naruto cared about was the Lord of House Tarly himself. "I'm coming for you, Lord Randall." Tarly, Naruto bellowed. Lord Tarly pulled at his reins, calming his terrified warhorse. Without a crack in his voice, the Lord of War released a desperate bellow. "Kill him! Kill him now, order or not." There was nothing the Reach Men could do. Naruto rushed at the rebel troops, bringing his blade around. Chakra flowed through his body. A quick swing later, he beheaded a Tarly retainer with ease. Power roared through his body. He jumped ahead, bringing his sword about. He was too quick, digging the edge into the steel pauldrons of another retainer, eliciting the most ear-splitting screech he'd heard in his life. With the crying man, Naruto found that his sword was lodged deep in his shoulder and armor. He grunted, eyes widening with fear when Reach Men inched closer, and Naruto bashed his head into the retainer's face, freeing his sword and creating a small pocket of space. Wanting to waste no time, the boy shot ahead, digging his sword into the retainer's gut. "Naruto, a glaive man is about to take you from behind," he growled at the information, releasing the handle from his vice-like grip. The prince somersaulted away, leaving him not only surrounded on all sides, but unarmed. "Shit, no questions or choices left." The boy drew his dagger, ready to keep his opponents at bay. Maybe this was a bad idea. Naruto stood straight, weapon barred in arms and stance, no matter the opposition. He was going to keep fighting. The glaive men lunged for him, leaving almost no space to escape. Over and over they poked at him, trying to box him in. If this was their plan, they're doing a damn good job at it. "Kakashi!" Naruto shouted in his mindscape. "Give me an idea, damn it." "Hold on, Naruto." Kakashi tapped his head. "I don't have time." Naruto roared. "You know what, fuck it." The boy channeled his chakra, building it around him like a sphere, scaring a few of the Reach Men. Naruto continued channeling his chakra, sending terror into the ranks of men surround him. One, though, thought it wise to attack him from behind, but Naruto saw right through his plan. The boy, with a speed unmatched by these heavily armored footmen, kicked the man's face, practically sending him flying. The Reach Men hollered and backed away one by one, trying to get a hit on the glowing prince. No matter, he was going to show them his real power. "Enough of this!" one of the retainers shouted. "Kill him now, Kagebunshin!" No jutsu, smoke shot in all directions, once more covering the Baratheon from sight. The Reach Men halted their assault, horrified of what was to come. They'd all heard the stories of how he'd managed to slaughter an entire regiment on his own. They'd heard the stories of how he was a monster, a demon incarnated in human form. They didn't believe it. Perhaps they were fools to not believe it. A series of guttural splashes were heard echoing in the retainer's ears, with each passing moment collapsing bodies rung beating against his eardrums. He could hear his men dying, but he couldn't tell how to stop him. This smoke came from nowhere, effectively blinding him. "Die!" From the smoke rushed the prince himself, sword drawn and shield wielded. Smoke traveled alongside him, leaving what seemed like 9 tails in his wake. The prince ducked beneath a Reachman's halberd with acrobatics unseen before he flipped midair, ramming his foot into the face of the soldier, breaking his stance. Naruto, almost as if possessed, moved with a masterful skill, lodging his sword into the man's torso, tearing it through his back. A kick later, the corpse flew from his slaked blade. He was going to kill anyone who got in his way. Naruto sheathed his sword, gaining a few confused and frightened looks from his opponents. In the back of his mind, he could hear Sasuke screaming for him to stop and think. Naruto knew that Sasuke was simply looking out for him, but he didn't care. He had a battle to win and people to protect. Throwing his hands into a cross hand seal, the boy channeled his chakra, revealing to all his true power. An explosion later, at least 80 clones appeared to replace those already dispelled. One by one they drew their swords and shields. One by one they stepped from their individual clouds of smoke, and one by one they chose their targets. Those in Tarly's army were terrified beyond belief. This wasn't what they were trained to fight. They weren't trained to fight a demon. They backed away with each step Naruto took towards them. With his helmet covering his face from view. Naruto smirked maliciously, unknowingly bringing out a side to him that he didn't know existed. Naruto blitzed forward, hurling his knives and sword towards his enemies. He was too fast for any of them to catch, but that didn't matter. He had a man to kill and an army to disperse. A spearman swung for his neck, nearly succeeding. Even he dropped to his knees and slid against the dirt and mud, kicking up grass in his wake. The spearman was immediately put in a bind. Naruto shot forward, grabbing the spear from the man's hands and shoving the blade into his guts. With a quick flick of his arms, the corpse was thrown free from the spearhead. A quick twirl later, Naruto managed to catch and block at least 10 arrows. Just as it came to a full circle, he smirked darkly, knowing that he'd caught Lord Randall Tarly off guard. Naruto, Sasuke's voice echoed in his head. "I can see a team of retainers rushing at you from the rear." "No problem, Sasuke," Naruto growled as he twirled his spear once more. Just as Sasuke said, the retainers appeared, galloping to his position. Spear and sword wielded. Naruto couldn't let them get too close or else it was game over. Naruto shot his arm forward, hurling his spear through the air. The foolish retainers were too cocky. One was impaled like a stuck salmon. Naruto jumped forward, fists clenched and power radiating within him. He was going to show these bastards who he is. He was going to show all of Westeros who he is. The retainer grew closer, with each second his sword ready to swing for his throat. Naruto kept his ground, channeling power into his forearms. "Take this." Just as the sword swung, Naruto bashed his steel bracers against the edge of the sword. Gasps were heard, sucking the wind and air from lungs of battle. The sword shattered into dust, with the tip of the blade shooting off into the throat of a reachman Levi. But before the retainer could ride off, the prince shot his arm back, pulling the man from his mount, forcing him to the murky mud below. He fought back, punching Naruto's jaw with all his power, but there seemed to be no effect. The Baratheon prince was still terrifying. Naruto laughed, grabbing the retainer by the face, twisting with a vicious crack being left in his wake. He smirked when the corpse hit the dirt, splashing in the mud. Reaching down, Naruto realized he needed a sword from the dirt. He took a deep, sundering breath. "I'm going to split your skull open, Lord Randall." A terrified horse rushed past him, but he caught the horse's reins, pulling up into the saddle. His clones were doing well, distracting the rest of Randall's forces. Slamming the spurs of the footrests into the horse, he twirled his sword, knocking arrows from the air, keeping his body unscathed. Luckily for him, Lord Randall wasn't afraid and rather self-absorbed. From what Naruto could see, Randall knew he had the advantage in every possible way. The smile only continued to grow on Naruto's face. Lord Randall was going to make a gamble by charging straight for him. This was the foolish gamble the Baratheon was hoping the proud man would make. Meeting him in open combat is the worst thing the Tarly could do. Naruto, Kakashi's voice sounded within. "Throw your palms onto the ground." Without a question, the Baratheon slammed his palms onto the dirt. Immediately men and horses were covered in smoke. Randall froze in his steps, pulling his reins to a stop. Heartsbane was wielded tightly, his eyes watching the growing plume of smoke. Never had he seen such a thing in all his years of warfare. Retainers and mounted men-at-arms rode up to meet him, 10 in total, each one worried and rather terrified of what other tricks the Baratheon had in store. Lord Randall gave his men a silent look. Infantry began to build behind him, forming their spears and shields for a charge. Orders were roared over the battle ambience, and he threw his arm forward, signaling the charge while the cavalry stayed in the rear. Randall's heart raced. The smoke only continued to grow. "My lord, is it wise to attack the prince when he has the advantage of shade?" one of his retainers asked. "No, it isn't." Randall glared and spat. For a few minutes he waited. Something was not right. Suddenly lightning exploded from the massive smoke cloud, jumping from armor-clad Levi to armor-clad Levi. Their armor only served to fuel the electricity. Their bodies writhed as their screams tore their throats asunder. One by one, Lord Randall watched almost 50 men die before his eyes, but just as Naruto felt that he was making real damage, the lightning fizzed and disappeared, leaving him in the cover of smoke. He took a deep breath. Rising to his feet, he twirled the arming sword in his hands, tossing the handle back and forth between. "I can hear you coming." From the smoke came a horse dressed in heavy plate armor, speeding at him. Naruto narrowed his eyes, catching the silhouette of a couched spear. Following the rest of the silhouette, the prince came to find that this was none other than Lord Randall Tarly himself. Oh, Naruto knew that the battle had finally reached a climax. After all, the Tarly had Heartsbane, a Valyrian steel greatsword, a weapon that his House Lannister had been wanting again for so many centuries. He stayed still, arms barred, chakra speeding up to his forearms. Come on. The spear came up to meet the prince. Naruto rammed his forearms through the wooden shaft, splitting the spear into thirds in a lightning motion. The Baratheon grabbed the spearhead, twirling the blade in his palms. Naruto dropped to his knee, jamming the blade into the horse's body, only to find that the plate armor did its job. For once he bent back, dodging the Tarly's massive boot. He could hear the man galloping away, rearing up for another charge back at him. Naruto watched worriedly, catching sight of Heartsbane being released from her sheath. The beautiful Valyrian steel blade glinted in the dull light of the sun above. Naruto was certain that the Lord was aggravated by him. Now it didn't matter. Naruto was going to stick Heartsbane in her master's gullet. Yes, Naruto was going to take Heartsbane for his own. He told himself that over and over again. The horse spun around, kicking mud in its wake, turning Lord Tarly back to face the Baratheon prince. You're proving to be more of a pest than I predicted. Lord Tarly was stern, but like all pests, you will be destroyed. He slapped the reins once, sending his steed forward with a fire unseen. Naruto watched him carefully, picking the spearhead from the ground below, twirling the spearhead around in his palm. Naruto narrowed his eyes at the incoming reach lord. With a quick hurl, the spearhead shot forward, digging into the chest of the lord, sending him flying from his mount. Naruto rushed ahead, jumping with chakra radiating off of his legs. He landed, digging his foot into the man's stomach. Naruto didn't spare him another thought and jammed his sword into the lord's chest. The light left his eyes as his pupils dilated the moment his final breath came free. Naruto knew what to do. He left his bastard sword in the man's chest and turned to the beautiful bastard sword. Heartsbane. The Baratheon prince reached down, lifting the blade to examine the different patterns with awe and adoration. It's light, no heavier than an arming sword. He swung the blade, cutting through the wind and smoke, his heart racing at how smooth the blade moved. Suddenly the boy collapsed to the dirt, energy spiraling around him, channeling into the sword itself. Heartsbane exploded in dim blue light that only he could see. Wisps of chakra flowed around the blade, dancing in all directions. He growled, wrapping both hands around the handle of the sword, trying to calm the energy coming from within. His lungs tightened and his heart nearly stopped. He felt pressure holding him down. Just as the pain came to a peak, the pain disappeared, the pressure disappeared, the chakra disappeared. All that remained were the faint voices whispering in the empty void. His mind had become Naruto. I'll name him Naruto. It's soothing, Sansa whispered, watching the waves crash against the rocky beach. I wonder if we'll ever get out. Don't worry, Arya sighed, resting her palm against Nymeria's ear. I like it here. Sansa's eyes went wide. I never thought the words would come from your mouth. You'd be surprised, Sansa. Arya gave her a sly smirk. Do you think they're safe? Who? Sansa gave Arya a raised brow. Everyone. Arya rested her elbows against the windowsill. Rob, Mother, Rick and Bran. Naruto. Sansa stayed silent. Fuck him, Sansa. Arya was flabbergasted. What, you heard me? Sansa glared, biting her lip. Naruto is a traitor and a liar. Shut up, Sansa. Arya nearly roared. You know as well as I that there was nothing he could do. Sansa looked away, turning her back to her sister. He could have done something. You saw his power, you saw his strength. He could have saved our father. No, he couldn't, Arya growled. You can keep thinking that way, but at least know that you're wrong. Naruto is doing everything he can to help us, to keep us safe. He is. Sansa turned back around, tears spilling down her cheeks. He is. I will have to give my maidenhead to Joffrey of all the people in Westeros when I have my blood. I went to him for marriage when I realized that Naruto couldn't keep us safe. I am giving everything to keep us safe. Not him. I thought Joffrey forced you to. Arya's jaw dropped. No, Sansa croaked. I had to, Arya. For you and for Bran. Sansa. Child. Arya. Child. Comes Sirio. Farrell's voice echoed from the doorway. It is time for the next session. Color slowly came to him, filling his irides with a dull scene. Raging fires of battle had disappeared, replaced with stable campfires. He tried to fight free, but his arms were bound by irons and chains. Next to the Baratheon sat Bran and his sister Maya, bruised cheek and imprisoned. In front of Naruto sat Jalabar, Gendry and Myra. Both were in the same state as he. The hedge knights were in another cart chained with Ser Delran and Lady Tarina. Naruto whipped his head around to see in a cage were their animal companions, Lady Sorsha and Summer. Both stayed silent, watching their captors with hungry eyes. Naruto immediately knew something was wrong. He shot up, blonde hair waving in the heavy wind. Sapphire eyes shimmered in the dim light of the shaded sun. He knew exactly where he was. The Stormlands, the home of House Baratheon. Uncle Renly is here. Naruto pulled at his binds, glaring at his predicament. Where are we? Naruto asked, beads of sweat slowly trickling down his cheeks. The Stormlands. Bran's voice came with a soft rumble. King Renly captured us. Where are we? Naruto shook his head. Suddenly a whip smashed against Naruto's head. Shut up, back there. Jalabar rolled his eyes, leaning his back into his seat. Naruto, we're on the King's Road to Storm's End. Fuck me. The Baratheon prince almost felt his heart stop. What happened? How long was I unconscious? Almost a week. Myra shook her head in disbelief. We were betrayed by the Lord of Tumbleton, outnumbered, we didn't stand a chance, also you were unconscious, too many died. Naruto the Baratheon stayed quiet, eyes trailing to the floor of the wagon cart. He was a fool to wait in Tumbleton, he was a fool. To think with a force of barely over 1,000 could hold off 10,000 tears formed threatening to fall. He shuddered, feeling a dark overwhelming dread wash over him, digging his nails into his palms. Naruto was certain he'd spill blood. The cart ride was shaky, filling him with a sickening panic. It made his stomach writhe, shaking himself from his thoughts. The Baratheon prince watched the Reachman Stormlander army march around them. Baratheon retainers rode alongside the cart, their shimmering iron burgonet turning to meet the prince's gaze. Behind Jalabar rode the Reachmen. Their polished steel burgonet glimmered with an amorous hue. Naruto took a sundering breath, watching the horizon. He was certain this army could be mistaken for a sea of metal and cloth. Banners were in the air, the decorative bolts of cloth beat in the heavy winds of the Stormlands. Baratheon, Tyrell, Tarly, Redwine, Hightower, Selmy, among others, filled the horizon with a myriad of colors and sigils. Naruto knew he was close as death was coming, he just knew it. Rob laid still, eyes watching the ceiling. Above him his forces were recuperating from the Battle of Harrenhal and were slowly replenishing for the final push against King's Landing and the rest of the Westerlands. It had been a week since his injury and subsequent recovery. He shivered within his bed furs, relishing in the cold winds speeding from the north. Your Grace, your wounds are fully healed. Talisa spoke silently, eyes averting from the king's topless body. You can walk whenever you feel you're ready. Thank you. Rob was quiet, eyes never meeting with the associate. I never got your name, my lady. Talisa Mager, she smiled, bowing her head slightly. Talisa. Rob slowly turned his head to face the woman. That's a beautiful name. She backed away slightly abashed. Why, your Grace, your name. He turned, facing the ceiling once more. I like it. Talisa couldn't help but feel the corners of her lips twitch. I thank you. You said I could walk, Rob asked, forcing himself up. He struggled slightly, but after releasing a groan the Stark finally sat straight. To meet the sight of the tan, dark-haired beauty, no words were shared between them. He had to admit she was rather gorgeous. Her long straight black hair was wrapped around into a bun with a few strands falling down to frame her face. She smiled softly, eyes trailing away. Your Grace. A deep rumble echoed into the room. The door burst open to reveal Lord Roose Bolton and Lord Great John Umber. The Great John was the color red with anger and fury spilling at the seams. Something wasn't right. Rob shot his legs from his bed, and with the help of Talisa the Stark was held steadily. Roose took a soft breath and handed the young Stark the small parchment. The Ironborn attacked the north. Rob, send both lords. A menacing glare. How can we trust this message? We've received similar messages from other keeps in the north and in the Riverlands. Roose quickly responded. They've completely taken much of the western coasts with little to no resistance. Send a raven to the Lords of the Vale to send their knights to drive the Ironborn out. Rob walked ahead. I don't care if we have to split our forces in half. Drive the Ironborn out of our lands, your Grace, Roose said with a deep tone. Another raven was received from who? Rob gave the Bolton a confused look. King Renly Baratheon. Hours prior. Get him up. A gruff voice forced the prince from his slumber. The night was dark and full of terrors. Fires raged with torches stuck into the muddied dirt. Men from all across the southern lands feasted together, cheering for the victory against the royal army. Naruto was groggy but managed to pinpoint the offhand remarks of the lords of the southern invasion. As each lord was named there came a quick but eventful story of his death. Naruto shivered softly, realizing he was probably the final hope for the southern force of the royal army. The fence door of his cage swung open and a large man-at-arms walked towards him, and Bran, with jingling keys tied at his waist. Hey, Bran called out, struggling against the wrought iron chains. Leave him alone. The man-at-arms cocked his arm back, slamming the back of his hand against Bran's cheek. Reddened skin and darkening bruise. Bran was shut silent and hoisted against the post. Naruto fought against his binds. When the man-at-arms looked ready to beat Bran to death, he tried to jump ahead, but the House Tyrell retainer standing at the entrance of the cage gave Naruto a disapproving look. Naruto tasted full well what growing strong could possibly mean. The retainer dug his fist into his gut, knuckles almost tearing his stomach open. The prince roared out, coughing blood and spit from his dry throat. I lost many friends because of you and your stupidity. The retainer glared, bringing his arm back again. You are a worthless shit, and you've killed our most respected lord. Lord Randall Tarly, you will pay for your treachery. Why His Grace King Renly would still want you alive, we will never know. I've been marked and branded already. Naruto spat, spraying the retainer's face with blood and Saliva, you can't hurt me any more than my own brother can. Oh, we don't need to hurt you, the retainer smirked. Look, his gloved hand wrapped around the prince's chin, twisting to face a cage next to his. Myra and Lady Tarina were hoisted against their levies and man-at-arms examining their bodies. Myra fought back against their wandering hands, while Lady Tarina did her best to take whatever punishment they could deliver. Myra bit her lip, pulling at her bind's head, sometimes shooting to face Naruto. She couldn't let them do this to her. She couldn't become prey. After all this time of being the predator, she bared her teeth when a levy groped her. Stop, Naruto cried. The retainer dropped his hold on the prince, but cocked his arm back, forcing his fist into the Baratheon's face. Naruto looked back at the retainer, eyes burning with a fire. Just as before, the retainer rammed his fist into Naruto's face, tearing at his barely healed whisker mark scars. But just before the pain could reach a climax, a soft angelic voice was heard from behind. What do you think you're doing? The retainer froze, as did the rest of the troops. The retainer shuddered in his plate armor, given the waving Tyrell sigil on his heraldry. He was horrified. The man didn't move or face the woman behind him. As your queen, I demand that you answer me. It was then that Naruto knew who this was. Lady Marjorie. The Rose of Highgarden, the levies and men-at-arms fled the scene, with the retainer leading the retreat. Lady Tarina and Myra collapsed to the mud. Cold-skinned and horrified, Bran coughed heavily, spitting blood that threatened to make him throw up. Naruto leaned his head against the post, left eye slightly swollen and right eye as wide as plates. Lady Marjorie, who was his aunt by marriage, looked no older than he. She was young, smooth-skinned, with a head of curled light brown hair. She was lithe, but not sickly. She was tall, but not lanky. She had an aura about her than had the young Baratheon. Entranced, she walked into the cage, soft palms resting against Naruto and Bran's faces. It was then that the prince and Stark realized they'd been captured into her spell. She made a small gesture with hands, and a Tyrell sergeant rushed to the scene, keys jingling in his palm. We have some things to discuss with you, Prince of the North, and you, Prince Naruto Baratheon. Marjorie smiled softly. Set these two free and give his battle companions cold drink and warm food, the queen said with a stern voice, and the next time men come to rape the women of Fox Company, castrate them. Naruto watched in absolute awe of what was to come. Chains clicked and fell to the ground, clanking against the prince's lap. Naruto stared at the woman standing at the entrance of the cage. She was dressed in a rather revealing dress, much like the whore he'd slept with when he went north. The Baratheon was tugged to his feet just as Bran was. What the hell's is going on, Naruto? Bran asked through clenched teeth. I'm not liking where any of this is going. And you think I am? Naruto growled. You heard as well as I. My uncle wants me alive. Bran looked down. Any ideas as to why? Hells if I know, Naruto groaned. Well, wonder no longer, Prince Naruto. Marjorie smiled. My men will escort you to my husband's tent. Naruto's eyes perked. Why, what does my uncle want with me? All will be explained in time. He deadpanned. Ambiguity is the last thing I need right now. What I need is a plan. Everyone, even my own uncles, think I'm an inbred bastard. Now I am the true son of King Robert Baratheon, and I'm the fool who abdicated my claim to the throne. I am no longer the heir. Fuck my life. The Baratheon stood straight. Bran walking up next to him. On either side of the two stood Tyrell and Baratheon retainers. There were 8 of them, each dressed in heavy plate with greatswords strapped to their backs. The trek was silent, watching the night life of the Baratheon encampment. Men cried out words of victory, laughing with one another. Some drowned themselves in mead, while others stuffed their faces with legs of chicken and lamb. But just as Naruto trudged past them, levies and knights stopped to watch him pass. Their eyes were wrought with fright, and some even with an undying hatred. All of this because of what he'd done. Naruto had never seen such hatred. The Baratheon prince stood tall, though finally waking from his grogginess. Ours is the fury, Naruto repeated in his head. Those were the words of House Baratheon. His house, he chided himself. What was he doing? He couldn't believe what he was telling himself. He was being prideful. Like a Lannister, he was being a fool. Pride. Naruto couldn't see the good his pride had done. He trudged along, eyes facing forward, never once meeting with the men of his uncle's army. There was a shuffle and a jingle of chains. Both Stark and Baratheon turned to see Gendry and Maya heading towards them, guards at their flanks. None of them had been so scared in their short lives. The 4 were pushed together and forced along where King Renly's tent was. The 4 hoped it wouldn't be too far. Their legs had been bound for more than a week with little to no movement. This was all too sudden for the 4. Maya continued walking, but was suddenly yanked back by one of the Baratheon retainers. She yelped, but was helped up by the young Stark. Despite his binds, Bran was pushed away and forced into Naruto, nearly making the irate Stark show his inner rage. Maya, though, was helped to her feet by a man dressed in ornate armor, armor that the Stark had seen before. My lady, the man's voice was smooth like milk. I apologize for the brutality of our men. Please, His Grace wishes to speak with the four of you. Sir Loras Tyrell. Naruto's eyes were wide with surprise. The knight slowly removed his helm, revealing the beautiful man. My prince, I have not forgotten the deed you'd done at the tourney of the hand. Sir Loras bowed his head slightly. And my condolences to you, Lord Stark. The Tyrell gave the retainers a look, and the men quickly dispersed. His fierce eyes and flowing with a power unseen, the troops quickly turned their eyes away, returning to their feasting and laughter. The four prisoners of Fox Company trudged anxiously into the tent, completely unaware of what they might find. Nephew, the king spoke calmly. Naruto's eyes ran up and down. His uncle Renly looked different, almost looking like a man, black, bearded with thick black curls of hair. Upon his head was a golden crown wrought into the form of antlers. His uncle, for the first time he'd ever seen, looked dignified, almost deserving of his post as king. Uncle Naruto was shaky. If you're going to kill me, be done with it. Why make us suffer? Sit. Renly sighed, pointing a hand to the seat in front of him. The young prince quickly complied, as did his companions. Naruto, do you know what I saw in you right from the start? The Baratheon prince was confused. No, I saw my brother Robert. Renly calmly spoke. Lord Stark was so consumed with his hatred for the Lannisters he let it slip over his head. His distrust for your mother, your uncles, and your grandfather far exceeded anything in his life. He knew this would be his chance of defeating the Lannisters. At something I know nothing of. What are you saying? Naruto asked, confused by his uncle's ramblings. You are the true king, Naruto. Renly smiled. You have the strongest claim between me and your uncle Stannis, but I abdicated my claim. Everyone knows that. Naruto gave his uncle a look of utter despair. And who would side with me? I have no allies. No, I had allies, but Lord Randall Tarley and his forces made sure to kill off most of them, only because you let your pride, that Lannister pride, get to you. Renly boasted. I told Lord Randall to take you alive, leave the casualties at a minimum, but Naruto, you decided to choose violence over peace, and your tiny force managed to kill over 2,000 men in less than 5 hours. That is a skill and command that even 1,000 Randall Tarleys or even 100 Stannis Baratheons could muster, but you just had to fight back. Naruto. Renly shook his head. Even as a child you'd rebel in slight and unimportant ways, but now with lives at stake, 7 kingdoms at war, and you decided to risk it all. Why are you telling me this? Naruto shouted. You are getting off topic. Why does it matter if I'm trueborn? Because you will be my heir. Renly smiled. I've had my first taste of real war of kingship. Your ability, dwarfs, mine. Your care for your men and your friends is outstanding. Your care for the small folk is admirable. I would love to be King Naruto, but I feel you'd be a better choice. But I have no claim. Then help us win. The Baratheon froze in his steps. His heart stopped beating, his mouth dried, and his body tensed. It can't be. From the shadows of the tent came an unlikely figure. He was scared, slightly, and bearded. He stood tall, slightly taller than Naruto, and bore a head of auburn curls. His icy blue Tully eyes gave it away. Rob Brand shot from his seat and practically jammed his head into the young wolf's gut. Rob groaned, shooting spit from his mouth. Maya and Gendry turned away, slightly put off by what they'd seen. The Stark groaned, repositioning himself to meet the Baratheon scion eye to eye. Naruto, King Renly told me everything. Every plan he was intending to execute. Rob said silently. With the royal army and the Lannisters boxed into the Westerlands and the Crownlands, they have nowhere to run. Even if we take King's Landing, we still have to deal with Uncle Stannis. Naruto shook his head. Naruto, your Uncle Stannis will be leading an attack on King's Landing soon, but he needs more manpower. Renly scowled. With you, Naruto, I will meet with Stannis in the field surrounding Storm's End and try to broker an alliance with him. What about Rob? Bran asked worriedly. Don't worry, Bran. Rob smiled sadly. I have to return to Harrenhal as soon as possible. Naruto collapsed into his seat, sweat dribbling down his brow. His eyes trailed left and right, uncertainty filling his body and mind. This was insane, almost impossible. They were helping him destroy his brother. They were helping him get the throne. This was almost something out of Targaryen history books, like the Blackfire Rebellion. What do we do now? Naruto asked. Will we have to return to our cages? No. Renly nodded his head. Your binds will be removed and you will receive a tent not too far from mine. Some of the men won't like it, but I am their king. They will follow. Naruto laid in his bed, eyes watching the tent flap and wave with the moist winds of Storm's End. Darkness had fallen and torchlight was slowly dimming. Even the candlelight was dying. He stayed silent, keeping to himself, knowing full well that the war will take a turn for the better, that everything will take a turn for the better. His smile kicked in his face, threatening to split it in two. He was going to win, and there was nothing that his enemies to do now. The power of the North and the power of the South would be behind him. How there was no way the young Baratheon could truly discern. It was almost surreal. He shut his eyes, Joffrey told him Robb wanted to kill him. Robb today was completely the opposite. Robb was kind and helpful, almost completely different than the one Joffrey spoke about. Naruto laughed softly. True friendships can't be broken so easily, but there was a question that the teen wanted answered. He sat up, leaning his back against the headboard, eyes groggy and barely able to adjust. How did Robb get here so soon and unnoticed? Naruto leaned his head against the padded frame. There is no way in hells that a king, no less a peasant, could make it through the King's Road without running into some royal army or Lannister patrol. Well, Naruto, Robb's voice sounded. I'd hoped you would have noticed that I'm different. Naruto nearly jumped from his bed. What the hell's Robb Baka? Robb nearly shouted. Keep your fucking voice down. Robb just spoke Nihongo. Sasuke, the one and only. Naruto the Stark nodded his head. The real Robb is still in Harrenhal, probably trying to get in the skirts of this really gorgeous field nurse. Naruto, she's like really hot on somewhat. Robb gave the prince a look. Why the hell do you always ramble? Naruto deadpan. Robb clenched his teeth, clearly wanting to punch the Baratheon. Why do you always have to interrupt stories with your impatientness? Naruto gave the Stark a disgusted look. What the hell is that supposed to mean? Oh, never mind. Robb all but shouted. Here, just wear this bracer, and when the time comes, channel chakra into the seal on your forearm. Why? Naruto gave his ghostly friend a look. Wait, what is going on? Why is it that every time you disappear, something big, terrible, or destiny changing always happens just for once? Be normal. Robb stopped popping into smoke once the cloud disappeared. It came to reveal the dark-haired onyx-eyed friend that Naruto had come to miss. Now why would I do that? It'll ruin all of the fun. With another pop, the Uchiha disappeared to be replaced with Robb Stark once more. As Robb, he gave a quick nod at the Baratheon, still trying to come to terms with what just happened. Naruto held the bracer and stared at the entrance of his tent. The door flaps were down, shielding his eyes from whatever was out there. Examining the bracer, it was a standard Fox Company bracer bearing yellow and orange with a tinge of red. Turning the bracer over, it came to reveal an intricate seal pattern drawn into the underbelly. Push chakra into it. The Baratheon was curious now. Slowly he placed his palm onto the matrix, channeling a small amount of chakra. Suddenly a pop was heard and smoke appeared coming from the bracer, revealing none other than Heartsbane. Holy shit! Naruto nearly fainted when the Valyrian steel greatsword fell to his lap. It was light like all Valyrian steel weapons should be. Lifting the longsword was one of the most exhilarating moments of his life. This time chakra fizzed into the steel, forcing a light blue glow to the length of the blade. Its glimmer was alluring, captivating the young Baratheon's gaze like no woman ever could. In the dim lighting, intricate markings that Valyrian steel was said to bear was revealed. They were dark, swirling around one another in a never-ending chase. His ears perked along with the strands of hair rising on the back of his neck. Someone was coming. He whipped his head back and forth, dribbles of sweat beginning to roll down his cheeks. The greatsword was still in his lap. From the absolute loyalty that almost everyone here felt for the late Lord Randall Tarly, the prince knew that some shit would be flipped if Heartsbane was seen in his possession. He pressed the sword against the seal on the underarm of his bracer. Oh shit, it's not going back. He pressed chakra into the blade, but the greatsword would not go back into the seal. Sasuke, Kakashi, Sakura, someone tell me how to do this. Naruto was met with no reply. Eyes darting back to the different places in the room, he tossed the greatsword, clashing it into a weapon rack. He bit back a scream and rushed from his bed, charging at the fallen rack. He fumbled, trying to clean the mess he'd created. Without a second thought, he channeled chakra once more, the image of an arming sword in his mind. A quick pop of smoke later, the greatsword had become an arming sword in disguise. Oh my gods, that actually worked. Naruto sighed in relief. I think I'm getting the hang of this. Time for some sleep. Naruto jumped when the soft hand rested against his arm. Who's there? Naruto's eyes were wide with fright. Lady Marjorie, the Rose of Highgarden, giggled slightly, turning her eyes away from the young prince. I came to see if you were alright. Oh, I'm fine, my lady. Naruto nervously laughed. I can see that. Lady Marjorie's face deadpanned. I heard shouting and loud banging and got a little worried for me. Naruto raised a brow. Of course. Marjorie smiled. Remember, I needed to speak to you as well. The young woman walked over to the weapon rack, tracing her fingers against the various pommels, and even wrapping her lithe hands around some of the handles. Her eyes were tracing left and right, looking at the mess the prince had managed to create and barely clean. With a sigh, she flipped on her heels and faced the Baratheon with arms crossed over her chest. Marjorie was clearly having trouble wording what she wanted to say. What do you know of your uncle Renly? What? Naruto gave the woman a strange look. Oh, you mean? Yes. Marjorie took a seat on the Baratheon's bed. The boy popped his neck and took a seat at his table. Only rumors. I am only married to him to bring House Tyrell and my brother closer to House Baratheon, Marjorie said softly. But Naruto, I am to marry you once we take the throne. I was told that was my duty. If he was told this any other day, the boy was certain he would have died of a heart attack, but given the various secrets and plans that were dropped onto him, this was the least surprising of them all. Also, it was the least life-threatening. Not only did he somewhat have the help of the North/Riverlands/Vale, but now he had the help of the Stormlands and the Reach. How much more could one person receive? Marjorie stood, those soft hands caressing the Baratheon's face. The height difference between the two was almost laughable. The boy was an entire head taller than the Tyrell, forcing her to turn her head up to lock eyes with him. She was a beauty up close, with soft skin and the most beautiful glittering eyes he'd ever seen. Sansa's were of ice, Myra's like chocolate, but Marjorie's were almost like staring into the ocean at sunset. She held depth and her smile was so sweet the boy felt his blood rush faster. My prince, she bowed quickly, turning to beat a retreat. Wait, Lady Marjorie. Naruto reached out, grabbing her arm, clasping her wrist. She turned, hair falling from her hairstyle. Her smile only grew as her blush brightened. Naruto. Morning came rushing into the Baratheon's tent, cold and rough. He ran a hand across his scarred face. Winds were crisp, bringing a tangy saltiness from shipbreaker Beta should have already left now, meaning the inevitable meeting with his uncle Stannis was at hand. Naruto took a deep breath, clenching his fists, hair sticking to his skin thanks to the salty humidity. Sapphire eyes turned and watched the tent with worried eyes. There was no telling what could happen when they went to meet with Stannis. He could either agree or even decide to attack them right there. No. Naruto took a deep breath. Stannis Baratheon was a proven commander and military mastermind, almost as great as his grandfather Lord Tywin Lannister. Stannis would never do something as stupid as attacking an army that outnumbered his by insane amounts. However, Stannis would try to swindle the men out from under Renly's control. Naruto knew the game by now. The throne was just a means to an end. What really mattered was the war between the 9 great houses of Westeros. It was silly when he thought of it, but it was their way of life. Throwing the linens from his bed, the boy slid free, throwing a padded gambeson over his ruffled tunic, and quickly slid into a coat of plates bearing the sigil of House Baratheon. He walked over to the bastard greatsword laying on its side against the weapon rack. Heartsbane had a strange sheen, gorgeous and alluring. The boy raised the sword and pressed it against the bracer in his hands, channeling chakra into the seal and the sword itself. A pop of smoke later, the sword disappeared altogether, revealing a soft glowing seal in the underbelly of the bracer. The boy smirked at his luck. So this is how you make things disappear. He took a deep breath and slid the bracer onto his left forearm and slipped his right arm into a steel bracer bearing the crown stag sigil. Throwing a belt around his waist, he strapped the laces and attached a sword to his waist. Naruto rested his palm against the handle of the arming sword and gave himself a quick look over before heading out. Just as he left the tent, his eyes shut tightly, almost beating against his eyelids. He winced, throwing his palm up to shield his sight. Nevertheless, he walked ahead, receiving chaste glances and outright glares from various men-at-arms and levies from across the Reach and Stormlands. He paid them no attention and headed towards his uncle's tent, fully intent on making the man spill every detail of the plan. The Baratheon prince wanted no mistakes. Enough people have died trying to put a Baratheon on that accursed throne. He entered the tent with a quick fashion, throwing the flaps open, revealing his battle companions eating breakfast with the more experienced, going over placement of troops with King Renly. Naruto's eyes widened at the sight, nearly feeling the urge to slap himself to check if it wasn't a dream. Myra turned to the Baratheon and jumped from her seat, wrapping her arms around the boy. She pressed her face against his neck, placing soft kisses, nipping at his neck. Naruto, I was terrified that you would have been hurt. Myra looked at him, chocolate orbs shimmering. You disappeared, and they released us this morning. Myra, calm down. Naruto laughed softly. I'm fine, uncle. Why did you release them? A king needs a king's guard. Renly nodded. Naruto turned his eyes to the various men and women present. There was a man that Naruto could easily discern. It was Ser Garland Tyrell, a taller, bearded, and more muscled version of the younger Ser Loras Tyrell, whom of which stood at Renly's side. The Tyrell knight, called the Gallant, rested his knuckles against the war table, blue eyes watching the pieces with a dreary look about him. I am not in any place to chide you or forgive you for the thousands of deaths you caused, but I am willing to move past it. Prince Naruto Garland spoke with a deep voice. In other news, I've received word that Stannis Baratheon has an Ashai witch at his side. I've heard things and none of them are any good. Is there anything we should be worried about? Naruto asked. No. Garland looked up from the war table. As long as we don't antagonize her or Stannis. Naruto frowned. Antagonize him? He's the one sticking to his campaign. I don't want the throne, but if Uncle Renly says I need To take it then I fucking will. If Stannis wants to fight then I will deal upon him death, a destruction far worse than 10 Tumbletons. Renly gave the boy a small smile. You sound exactly like your father. Naruto felt the beads of sweat dribble down his neck. Sapphire eyes meeting with the eyes of Melisandre the Baratheon prince drowned out the nonsensical banter between his uncles and concentrated completely on the woman dressed in red and crimson. Her skin was unbelievably pale with a beautiful gold-red choker wrapped around her throat. The centerpiece that caught the boy's eyes was the massive ruby that seemed to be glowing almost like a heartbeat. It would brighten only to retract. He wanted to turn away from the fire priestess, but she would not stop looking at him. He gripped the reins, struggling against her flaming stare. It was nerve-wracking. Bran felt the same along with Summer behind him. The entire battle companion force was feeling uneasy about the interaction between the Baratheon brothers, and more so Melisandre's eyes. She was a foreigner, far more foreign than any of the Free City folk. She was a witch in league with powers beyond their world, or so they heard. King Stannis Baratheon has been reborn amidst salt and smoke. Melisandre suddenly spoke, breaking the heated argument. He is the Lord of Lights, chosen, born amidst salt and smoke. Renly had a small laugh. Is he a ham? Naruto stifled a laugh, but it didn't go unnoticed. And you, Prince Naruto? Stannis glared. Last I heard you were defeated at Tumbleton after killing thousands of Lord Randall Tarley's men. What are you doing in league with your former enemy? Because unlike every other person in my family, he hasn't tried to actually kill me. Naruto replied with spite. I know you think me baseborn between my mother and Uncle Jamie, but you are wrong. It is no matter. Naruto. Stannis laughed. You abdicated your right to the throne, so that leaves it all to me. Renly, the throne is mine by right. All those who deny that are my foes. The whole realm denies it from Dorne to the Wall. Renly suddenly spoke. Old men deny it with their death rattle, and unborn children deny it in their mother's wombs. No one wants you for their king. You never wanted any friends, brother, and a man without friends is a man without power. Naruto caught sight of Stannis' change of demeanor. For the sake of the mother that bore us, I'll give this one night to reconsider. Strike your banners, and come the dawn surrender to me. I'll give you your seat on the small council again, and I'll even name Naruto my heir until a son is born to me. Otherwise I will destroy you. Look across those fields, brother. Renly sighed. Do you think a few bolts of cloth will make you king? Stannis almost looked like he was going to laugh. No. Renly glared menacingly. The men holding those bolts of cloth will make me king, and I was told not to antagonize him. Naruto deadpanned, with his heart dropping into his stomach. Honestly, what the hell's just happened? I thought we were supposed to broker peace and a possible alliance. Naruto, was this part of the plan? Bran asked with worried eyes. I can sense a lot of anger rolling off of King Stannis. No. Naruto quickly replied with the same worried tone. If anything, all of our plans have been completely thrown out of the window. Naruto. Stannis called. Come with me. I will make you my heir. If you do so right now, you can return to King's Landing. You need not wallow with your foolish uncle. Renly, what the hells is going on? Naruto looked onward, darting his eyes back and forth between his uncle's pleading faces. Since when was I a piece in the game? I thought I was one of the players. No, I've been played. Naruto's sapphire eyes narrowed, pulling his reins back, bearing closer to Bran and his battle companions. Renly and Stannis took notice of this and quickly knew what the boy was thinking. The boy kept silent, hand unconsciously reaching for the sword at his side. Eyes darted left and right, unknowing of what his uncles were thinking. He turned to see Myra and Jalabar moving closer to Bran, with Ser Delran and Lady Tarina coming close. The knights and Lady Sorsha had closed the rear flank, ready for anything. Naruto, Gendry's voice sounding a pitch higher than normal. Give us the order and we'll run. We're all together. No, just wait. Naruto replied with a hushed whisper. Stannis sighed softly. Naruto hoped the old man hadn't heard anything they were saying. Fine, come the dawn, you two, we shall see. Stannis' expression dropped and immediately fell on a frown, pulling at his reins. The man and his small host turned back towards their forward camp. Naruto took a shuddering breath. Sapphire eyes locked with the retreating form of his uncle. Silence fell upon the assembly. Uncertainty was in the air, and Naruto knew what was going to come. We're getting ourselves in a dangerous situation. I loved him once. Renly scowled, turning to Naruto with rage in his sapphire eyes. To think we were foolish enough to convince him. Come, we must prepare for the inevitable assault tomorrow morning. Time skip. Naruto arrived at the camp, sweat finally gone and an empty pit in his stomach. We shall see. Naruto repeated in his mind. The look of conviction was horrifying. Naruto clenched his gloved fists as he pushed through his tent flaps behind him. The battle companions quickly followed suit. Sweat trickled down Jalabar's and Ser Delran's brows. They knew this wasn't over. They knew battle will come. What is your plan? Naruto. Ser Andar asked. Worriedly, with your uncles clearly at odds, their armies will both most likely attack us. I agree, Myra said with a near-quiet whisper. They all hate us, I can see it in their eyes. At any rate, Lady Tarina quickly interrupted their group ramblings before it could truly build in volume. We cannot stay here. The longer we're here, the closer to death we'll all be. The companions agreed with a resounding approval. The knights immediately went to planning escapes, with the women immediately disagreeing, adding to the chaos within the tent. But in the corner near the weapon rack, Naruto stood with his arms crossed over his chest. Bran stayed silent, with Summer silently growling at the growing commotion. I agree with all of you, Naruto suddenly said, silencing the growing banter, but we need to plan this correctly. If we leave too soon, there's a chance that my uncle Renly could defeat my uncle Stannis, and I'll have the power of the Reach, and the storm lands on our asses. If we leave too late, my uncle Stannis might defeat my uncle Renly utilizing that red witch of his, and all of us would die nonetheless. We all saw her eyes. She was examining us. What would the perfect time be then? Bran asked. Just the Baratheon took a deep breath. Just stay alert and stay close. At any moment chaos would ensue in an instant. Any signs we should keep watch for? Maya asked, turning to face her half-brother. The Baratheon took a deep breath. From what I could remember from Tumbleton, their morale was already shaky. Now that I've killed their most honorable lord, the only thing remaining is the final push to send them careening to the first lord they see fit to lead them. Will it be you? Maya asked without a second thought. No, he sadly replied. There will be no way in all the seven hells that I'll be able to lead this many people. No, I sense one of these two kings will die. With the look that the Red Witch was giving us, I'll have to say my Uncle Renly will be the one to die. It hurts me to say that, but we need to get back to King's Landing with an army or without. But why King's Landing? Sir Warren asked with a frown. Haven't we basically cut ties with your brother? We have, Naruto quickly replied. There were confused looks on his friends' faces. Our enemies are numerous, and we have to pick them off one by one, starting with letting my uncle square off. Naruto turned back to his weapon rack, hands sliding against the polished brass pommels. They are my uncles, but I bear no love for them, not anymore. I thought I was a player in this game, only to find that I am in fact just a piece, and the board is Westeros itself. I thought I was the better man, and that I was done being the victim of High Lord's games, but this was only proof that I wasn't. Tumbleton was a foolhardy choice, one that will haunt me. Naruto shut his eyes, slowly pacing back and forth, hands rubbing against his whiskered cheeks. Tumbleton is a lesson, a reminder of what a fool I am in this Game of Thrones. Never will I do something like this again. We are in too deep, and I don't know what I'm doing. Not even a year ago I was drinking wine with the thoughts of the Iron Throne being almost non-existent. How did it come to this? He turned, sapphire eyes glimmering as hot tears fell down his scarred face. How did it degrade so quickly? Why did it come to this? I can't even find words to describe this travesty. So much pain and suffering brought about this quickly. We've lost men and women we've come to see as brothers and sisters, and what are we doing about it? Joining sides with the very ones who put them in their shallow graves. I am tired of waiting to be exchanged to the next king, waiting for favor of a prince. Naruto sniffled, hand wrapped around the handle of his sword. Never again. All of you, you're my friends, my family, and if any of you, Maya quickly wrapped her arms around him, knocking the wind from his chest. He groaned into her tight embrace. Soon enough, Bran and Myra joined. Within moments the companions embraced one another as tightly as they could, their hearts racing together as one. He could feel their thoughts from their hearts. He could sense their fear and worry. They understood him. First things first, Naruto said suddenly. We need to free their prisoners. Rob stared out of the window, watching the men go about their patrols. Stark banners of the howling wolves waved brutally in the cold winter winds. He was silent, still solemn of the casualties that it took to get here. The lives were numerous and endless, but he made it. He'd wounded Lord Tywin, cleaving his face, scarring the legendary and untouchable man. A spiteful smirk grew on his face. Lord Tywin was on the run, probably being a lion and protecting his pride. A foolish gesture, Rob thought. King's Landing meant nothing now that his alliance with King Renly was cemented. There was little work done to get it, but the first time he saw it, it caught the young king off guard. It was written in a way that it seemed the Baratheon had already talked to him before. Rob couldn't remember any messengers sent to the king. Whomever it was that set it up was a godsend. Your Grace, a voice came from behind. The Lannisters have completely locked the Crownlands entrances and exits. Lannisters and royal army forces have built all along our borders and in their keeps. How many men? Rob asked. We've killed his personal host. He can't have that many in reserves. Last scout reported 100,000 waiting in the Crown ones with at least half of that in King's Landing, the voice said once more. What are your orders? Robb turned on his heels, meeting face to face with his marshal and high generals. What of our strength? 55,000 men, Lord Yohn Royce replied. With that amount we'd be crushed within the week. We could draw the fight out and possibly weaken them through attrition. We will receive unnecessary casualties if we charge through their lines, then we won't. Robb walked up to them, motioning for the war table. Split our force. I'll lead one half through the Westerlands wreaking havoc, and you will have to lead the other half and harass their borders as much as you can. Wear them thin, and maybe, just maybe, we could weaken them enough to assault with King Renly's forces. Your powerful, Bran said suddenly. I've seen your strength firsthand. Why don't you destroy everyone? What? Naruto asked suddenly, a brow raised. What are you talking about? Bran frowned. Don't play stupid. I know I've watched you as carefully as possible. You become unnaturally strong, and sometimes you become unnaturally fast. You're hiding a power beyond you, Bran. Naruto started facing his young Stark friend. A clever lie was born immediately, but the look in the young Stark's mind kept the lie from ever escaping his lips. I'd love to use my power. I'd love to defeat my enemies with this fucking power, but then I'll have 7 kingdoms against me. I'll prove I'm the monster they painted me to be. I will not become who they say I am not what they say I am. If I have to make myself seem like I'm powerless, that will only mean I've gotten the upper hand. Look at Grand Maester Pycelle. What of him? Bran asked with a confused look on his face. He acts senile and like a scraggly old man. Naruto shook his head. That man is sadly not. He's perfectly fine and actually stands upright. I remember a few months before leaving for Winterfell, I saw that man talking in complete sentences, having a verbal scuffle with Lord Varys. He pretends to be weak so he won't be a target. Sadly, I'm a prince. I'll always be a target. I just need to think of a way to gain power without becoming the very thing I detest. But Bran looked at him with worried eyes. Who cares if you're called a monster? You have power. So did Aegon Targaryen. Naruto replied. He had dragons, he had power, he united the 7 kingdoms. I was getting to that. Naruto glared. Bran looked down slightly, backing away from Naruto's glare. Do you know why we're here? We lost a battle, Bran asked. We did. Naruto frowned. But we're here because we have been given an opportunity. What kind of opportunity? Bran was intrigued now. It's a bit of something I learned in King's Landing. The prince smirked. My uncles only want me for one of their goals. I'm only there for a certain amount of time before I get cast aside once more. Believe me, I'd side with my uncle Renly in a heartbeat. His promise of the throne was almost too perfect to behold. What's stopping you? Bran couldn't understand the inner workings of the prince. The fact that the people do not support me, Naruto replied. Everyone assumes the lords and ladies of court have the power, but what is the few compared to the many? Bran tilted his head. Let me explain it better. Bran, which is more important, the small folk or the highborn? Naruto asked. The Bran stopped for a moment, contemplating his response. The small folk. If there were none, the highborn wouldn't rule anyone. Exactly, Naruto replied. You heard as well as I about the riots in King's Landing, about how the High Septon was torn to shreds and my brothers and mother were nearly killed. If the small folk hate their leader, they'll revolt. Naruto sighed. If I kill innocent civilians, then the entire 7 kingdoms will revolt. I might even attract attention from across the narrow sea. Fine, I get it, Bran replied with a glare. I just don't get why you won't beat them into submission. Aegon had 3 dragons, Bran. Naruto frowned. I don't. Arya crossed her arms, watching the waves crash against the shore. Royal army levies dug defenses and stuck pikes into the stony sand. Nymeria bared her teeth, hazel eyes following after the various men marching across the coast. They were preparing the defense of King's Landing. With all the commotion within the city, she was absolutely certain the war was finally coming to the city. At least something great came out of all of this. Joffrey had returned from the fronts, his face scarred and eyes filled with fear. The image was amusing to the young Stark. The terror in his envious eyes made Arya's soul explode with joy. The useless child was put in his place, reminded of why he was such a shit. But with Joffrey came his grandfather, Lord Tywin. The man's face was wrapped in bandages, and it was even said that Robb had done it. The man, revered and feared by all in King's Landing, had arrived, a broken man with a broken host. When he'd first arrived, Arya had to rein her emotions to keep from insulting House Lannister even further. She sighed, running a hand through her dark hair. Her house was proving the Lannister power to be nothing but a facade. The deeds of her brother were being sung within the taverns, and even servant boys and handmaidens were gossiping within the Red Halls tales of the gallant Robb Stark, the young wolf with his battle companions charging into the battlefield and slaughtering all who stood in their way. But among the stories of heroism in this war of 5 Kings. Arya's favorites were of the legendary Fox Company. Arya's hand wrapped around the hilt of needle with a shaky breath. One day she hoped she would join Fox Company with Naruto and Bran. She'd already heard the stories of the women of Fox Company war maidens who were just as dangerous as they were beautiful. As smile continued to spread across her face, one day she'd go down in history with the likes of Queen Nymeria of the Rhoynar, or Queen Visenya Targaryen. But all her happiness fell when her gray eyes landed upon the new battlements being built along the walls of King's Landing. She'd overheard, thanks to her warging into Nymeria, that King Stannis Baratheon, Naruto's uncle, was planning a two-pronged attack with the help of mercenaries and his own personal armies. While some of the talk was extremely political, she managed to pull some bits and pieces that she understood. Stannis's domain was only Dragonstone and the castle that lied there, but what many forget, the greatest house in Westeros's history originated from Dragonstone. The forges were his and his alone, along with many of the islands in the narrow sea. Robb's domain was Winterfell and the outlying villages. While larger in land mass than Stannis's, it had a smaller population because of the North's ragged climate. Arya knew what would come should Stannis march upon King's Landing. With the way Lannister and royal army morale was, it was only a matter of time before they were all killed. Hopefully Arya felt she might be able to get Sansa and Lady and escape from the Crownlands and the chaos, maybe meet up with Naruto and Fox Company. Thinking of the Ginger Stark, Sansa was making exceptional progress under Syrio Farrell, but there was something about Sansa that still spoke of worry and doubt. Arya's hand tightened around the hilt of needle, feeling the hairs on the back of her neck stand. The doors creaked, and with a motion like water she drew her blade like a master duelist. Who she saw, though, was none other than Sansa, her own sword drawn, catching Arya's nimble blade. The two sisters eyed each other with narrowed eyes. Grey met icy blue with sparks glowing between. Sansa's sword was a lot like Arya's, except with a wider blade. There was enough room on Sansa's sword for a 10-inch fuller to allow better blood flow. Sansa's appearance had changed greatly as well. Her red hair was held into a style similar to that of Queen Cersei, except for the 2-foot-long braids that came around to rest above her chest. Sansa wore a black leather corset that was clearly armored. Beneath the armored corset was a purple dress that Sansa had sewn herself. The dress fell to her right knee, but in a diagonal slope rose to her left hip, revealing black breeches with small plates of metal sewn to the surface. Instead of the classic platform shoes of noble women in King's Landing, she wore boots that men or women of the royal army wore. She looked formidable, and like someone Arya felt she could respect. Slowly but surely the two broke out into smiles and slid their blades from their connection, sheathing them away. Sansa nodded to her little sister, whom of which was also her impromptu teacher when Syrio Farrell wasn't available. To say Sansa was amazed with the strengths of her little sister was an understatement. She'd seen her sister in an entirely new light, and she was certain that she would never wish for Arya to change ever again. You're getting better with the draw, Sansa. Arya beamed, taking a bite of the apple on the table. What brings you here? I overheard some people talking. Sansa gave Arya a half smile. Fox Company was found to have survived the Battle of Tumbleton. Does that mean that Bran is alive? Arya asked with tears in her eyes. It does. Sansa frowned. But that's the end of the good news. What do you mean? Arya asked worriedly. Theon attacked Winterfell and razed it to the ground, Sansa said through gritted teeth. No one knows if Rickon is dead or alive. But why? Arya's hands dropped into her lap. Rickon was just a boy, I know. Sansa's blue eyes trailed over to the sword on her hip. What I'd give to find Theon. Night had fallen upon the encampment of King Renly Baratheon. The winds were sharp, with a blade-like cool about it. Banners and the so-called bolts of cloth whipped with the rising torrents. This was nothing more than a gamble on King Renly's part. Having been the Lord of Storm's End and Warden of the Stormlands, he trusted the fluctuating weather of Shipbreaker Bay to keep them safe from Stannis's navy that outnumbered. His torches had to be lit and relit due to how strong these winds were. Many of the Stormlander levies told dark stories around their campfires and braziers, inspiring fear and worry among the troops. Their morale was already dwindling to begin with, and they hadn't seen their king since his return from meeting with King Stannis and his host. There was an aura of uncertainty that had befallen the encampment as men drank and feasted as if they'd won the war. They knew that one day they'd have to fight the stalwart Stannis Baratheon, but having the confrontation this soon was never on anyone's schedule. What made it worse, no extra defenses were made along the coast. The fear of Stannis rushing their positions was a real and grave threat that needed attention. Even with all the fear of King Stannis and the Lannisters of King's Landing and Casterly Rock, their thoughts fell to the subject of a certain prince in his tent shrouded in darkness. The prince and his company waited They were crouched with a few sitting upon the wooden floor. Their eyes were closed, awaiting the inevitable horns to blow or the fires to spread between them and 100,000 men. There was practically no way they could escape unless by some force of the gods a great distraction would allow them to escape. He kept silent, slowly opening his eyes. Myra's daggers rested in their holsters while she stabbed another pair in front of her eyes, trailing along. Bran was seemingly asleep with the hilt of his arming sword resting on his right shoulder and his gloved hands wrapped around the blade. Jalabar already had his bow knocked and ready for draw. The knights had their shields strapped to their backs, just waiting to be wielded. Lady Tarina and Sorsha were calm and collected. Her custom arak rested on her lap. Maya and Gendry, though, waited with simple arming swords for what was to come. Leaving Naruto, the prince surprised his companions when he revealed Heartsbane. The knights and Ser Delran were absolutely awestruck, and Lady Tarina had never looked so impressed before. Nevertheless, he waited as well. Much like Bran, the hilt rested on his shoulder as he slowly caressed the length of the Valyrian steel blade. It was like a dream, Naruto thought, a dream he'd never felt was possible to attain a Valyrian steel bastard sword just for him. Naruto watched the world around him, energy fluctuating in all directions. Baratheon patrols were everywhere, even with two of Renly's Kingsguard standing at the front of Naruto's tent. There wasn't enough commotion for Naruto to even fancy the idea of escape, but there was a sudden growth in movement. Naruto perked up, gaining the attention of his friends. Myra gave him a worried look and quickly wrapped her hands around the two daggers in the floorboards. Bran slowly trailed his hands up to the ornate hilt of his arming sword, and the rest of the companions simply prepared for the worst. But within seconds the tent flap was thrown open to reveal none other than Queen Marjorie. She wore a dark-colored cloak over her green dress and quickly nodded to the Tyrell retainers behind her. Prince Naruto, Prince Brandon, you two have been summoned to my husband's tent, Marjorie said softly. Myra and Maya looked at the blonde prince, waiting for his response. They hadn't predicted his uncle summoning him. Jalabar nodded at Naruto and quickly placed his nocked arrow into his quiver. The companions one by one rose to their feet, stretching and yawning in response. The night was young and ripe for blood. With a begrudging sigh, Naruto and Bran shot to their feet and followed after Marjorie out of the tent. The trek was embraced with uncertainty. Levies of the Stormlands and the Reach immediately dropped what they were doing, watching Naruto and Bran traverse through the muddy camp walkways. Naruto felt a smirk form on his face. They were all at least consistent in how they felt just as they passed. The forces went back to whatever it was that they were doing. It surprised the Baratheon prince. Instead of preparing for what was projected to be an imminent attack on their camp, they're feasting as if this was the safest place in all of Westeros. Now I don't question why we killed so many of them. Naruto frowned. They're unprepared, probably driven by the promise of glory and riches. Disappointing. Marjorie came to a halt, bringing her arm around, lifting the tent flap. Within, the woman Brienne of Tarth was the first to welcome the young prince. Naruto and Bran nodded their heads with respect to the only woman of Renly's Kingsguard. She too followed suit with a small smile on her pale face. While she wasn't pretty by any means, Naruto felt her skills with a blade far outshined any of her ugliness. He walked carefully into the tent, finding a large war table with pieces placed all over the boards. Ser Garland Tyrell and Ser Loras Tyrell were standing on either side of King Renly, with some of the highest lords of the Reach and Stormlands present. Each of the lords and knights gave their own 2 cents for their choice of action. While the knights of House Tyrell and a few of Renly's bannermen wanted a preemptive strike against Stannis' camp, while others wanted to build actual defenses, and the minority wanted to leave Storm's End entirely and prepare for an ambush of Stannis' forces. Either way, Naruto knew none of these choices would end well for Renly or Stannis. Naruto, nice of you to join us. Renly smiled, looking away from the war table. Ser Garland and Ser Loras both nodded respectfully to the young Baratheon. The other lords shared weary looks before nodding their own heads. Tumbleton was a fresh scar, and the blade that caused it walked among them. Naruto didn't blame them at all, but they could get mad at him for as long as they wanted. Stannis was the bigger enemy, and Joffrey was the biggest enemy. Once they had accomplished their goals, Naruto was more than willing to seal this wound forever, be it through strength and arms or through wit and pen. If he was to be king, Naruto needed to get these fools to believe in him, or at least fundamentally trust him enough to follow him. The politicking of King's Landing and the Game of Thrones was mind-numbing for the prince. He couldn't believe he was going to agree with Joffrey, but Creating a royal army was the first step in ending the never-ending cycle of lords constantly at each other's throats with their own personal armies. It was a small change that was definitely going to have lasting repercussions. It's good to be here. Naruto bowed to his uncle. What is our plan of action? Uncle Stannis is only just a few miles away, consolidating his strength. I concur, Sir Garland. Frown. That is why I say we strike while he gathers his strength. He's vulnerable in his camp, and if they're as busy as I think they are, their camp could be easy to sneak into with the right people. If we sneak in, what do we do? A reach lord asked. We kill Stannis Baratheon. Naruto rested his knuckles against the war table, blue eyes scanning the pieces. There were many pieces spread across the Stormlands. Some were in the shape of a burning heart, while others were in the shape of crowned stags. There were 2 armies under Stannis in the Stormlands. That they knew of, there were several armies under Renly, and the reach. The size difference was almost comical, and Naruto felt a chuckle beginning to surface, but that smile quickly fell when his thoughts fell upon the smile of Melisandre the Red, which she clearly had something planned for us. Naruto frowned once again. I know that the bitch has something up her sleeves. We could send just a small team out to distract Stannis and split them off into the bay. A Stormlord asked. If we drive them into the ships, the torrential waves and storms could destroy quite a few of them. No, a reach lord said, shaking his head. Despite the Stormlord expertise with Shipbreaker Bay, we need ships to complete the 2-pronged attack on King's Landing. If you hadn't realized, House Redwine has given us all the ships they could muster, along with that of House Hightower, neither of which have enough galleys to transport 100,000 men. Then do you propose to dig in? A Stormlord asked with a glare. We outnumber Stannis. With a host double the size of his, we could easily march there now with a preemptive strike and kill the heretic where he stands. Naruto watched the Stormlords bicker with the Reach Lords like children fighting over toys. Given the look on his squire's face, Bran was feeling the same. He scrunched his face in a way to express how uncomfortable he was. The Baratheon prince turned his sapphire eyes to the sight of his uncle, watching with slight amusement. With arms crossed over his chest, he raised a brow at the way Renly was handling the situation, but he didn't make a comment on it. This only solidifies my thoughts. Naruto frowned. Uncle Renly will die soon. I can't stay here, but there's a few people I need with me when I return to King's Landing. Tuning out the bickering lords and the uncaring king, Naruto's blue eyes trailed across the tent and rested upon the image of Brienne of Tarth, the only woman of Renly's Kingsguard. She was a strong fighter, and given her loyalty, Naruto was certain he could offer her something he knew she wouldn't refuse. Maybe if Renly dies, I could offer her revenge, and if that is what's going to come of all of this, then I suppose I could still get half the promise. The Reach's eyes trailed back to the Tyrell Knights. Both were fixated on the war table, arguing with the Stormlords. Loras stayed close at Renly's side, clearly intent on ending this farce of a meeting as soon as possible. After all, that is exactly what all of this was. They weren't making any progress towards a plan. They were, if anything, revealing the truth of this Reach Stormlands alliance. These lords clearly didn't trust each other and were practically at each other's throats. If Renly dies, who's going to stop them from actually barring blades? Naruto frowned. Like I thought, I definitely could receive the help of the Reach. The Stormlords are definitely going to fall to Uncle Stannis. After all, if I marry Marjorie, the forces of House Tyrell and their bannermen will be at my command. And Loras, I can convince him, like Brienne of Tarth, they'll join me and my battle companions. After all, I'd be a fool to leave such perfect opportunities to waste away. Lords Hightower and Redwine are loyal to House Tyrell through blood. Naruto fell into a thinking daze. The other lords follow because of honor-bound oaths. If they switch allegiance, have Prince Naruto do it. Naruto looked at the Stormlord who mentioned him. He glared at the man with fire burning in his eyes. He wasn't their pawn to send into the field of battle. He wasn't even on their side. He was only here because he wanted to see how long he could milk this situation. If he was to return to King's Landing, he shouldn't arrive without an army. He looked away from the Stormlord, crossing his arms over his chest. To think the gall of these lords. No, Renly replied, my nephew will not lead the defense against Stannis. He's only a boy, but he killed 5,000 in his defense of Tumbleton. The Stormlord pleaded. He could do damage uninhibited to Stannis' forces. My word is final. Renly sighed, pushing from the table. Naruto raised a brow when he sensed anger rising. You're a fool if you think you can be king, you weak fool. Bran looked at Naruto with wide eyes, and the two slowly began to back away. The Stormlord slammed his fist into the table, knocking the pieces down, forcing them to roll about. It was a mess within seconds, but Renly was undeterred. If there was something that Naruto could give his uncle, Renly was steady as stone when it came to Something he believed in. Watch yourself, sir. Brienne's voice appeared threateningly. Her metal-gloved fist rested on the Stone Lord's shoulder, forcing him to face her. You will not speak to his grace in such a way. And here we go. Naruto waited patiently. And you, the Lord shouted, pushing the woman away, drawing his sword. To think a woman made Kingsguard, but not my own son. Sir Loras was quick with the draw as expected. Garland waited, hand resting on the pommel of his blade. The rest of the lords, though, watched with distance between the Kingsguard and the irate Stormlord. Within seconds the Stormlord lowered his weapon, a scowl spread across his face. You can take that title and shove into your arse, the Stormlord roared. I'm taking my forces home. Brienne once again stood in his way, sword poised. Naruto's hand fell to the sword on his hip, awaiting the confrontation. I wonder who's going to swing first. Brienne Renly sighed, rubbing his temples. Let him go, like I expected from someone like you. The Stormlord quickly left a smug look on his face. And you, Prince Naruto, I pray to the gods that this war claims your life. Naruto, we've successfully released the prisoners. Jalabar smiled. Dark skin does have its perks in the night, you know. Where are we meeting them? Naruto asked. Close by. Jalabar pointed to the map. We're meeting them along the coast of Shipbreaker Bay. We'll easily mask ourselves along the coast. If what you said about the Red Witch is true, then Stannis won't mount a full assault. Naruto frowned. He might use the Red Witch for some underhand assassination or whatnot. We might not know now, but just get ready for whatever might spring forth from the night. What's the plan of escape? Sarandar asked, sheathing his blade. Bran, Myra and I will stay behind, Naruto said, getting strange looks from those present. The three of us have some business that needs to be attended to. All right, the rest of you will need to escape in the ensuing chaos. Kill any and all who get in your way. We will only have a short time frame to escape the Baratheon. Yawn. The moment you start hearing shouts, take off into the night. We are escaping, not exterminating. Your survival is paramount, so don't worry about Bran, Myra and I will be fine. Once you meet with the rest of our forces on the coast, lead them to King's Landing. Yes sir. The cry was like a resounding applause. Go get your gear and stay together. The battle companions quickly shuffled from the tent, armor and empty scabbards clanging against their leather tassets. Naruto shrugged, popping his vertebrae up and down as aching back. Bran and Myra looked no different. It was clear that they felt they've outlived their stay. The fires of war were on their doorstep, but there was business to attend to, and there were knights and houses to deal with before they left. All right, you two know what you're supposed to do, right? Naruto asked. There are people and resources here that we just cannot leave behind. Bran, secure horses for our escape. Myra, try to convince Lady Brienne to join us. I'll handle. Sir Loras understood. The three shared one quick nod and shot off through the war camp, doing their best to seem as inconspicuous as possible. Already the Baratheon forces were on edge. It seemed that news of Stannis' possible assault had spread like wildfire throughout the camp. Naruto headed straight for Renly's tent with Myra in tow. Bran gave the two a knowing nod and quickly disappeared into the night. The Baratheon scion peeped his head into the tent, finding it completely vacant save for the flickering flame in the fire pit. Naruto rested a palm on Myra's stomach, halting her in her steps. He shook his head and waited once again. Footsteps splashed into the mud, but none were coming anywhere near the prince. Like speed like lightning, but with grace like wind, he and Myra blitzed into the tent, throwing their backs against the ornate Verwood desk, serving as a war table for Renly. Go find Brienne, Naruto whispered. I'll look for Sir Loras. Good luck and be safe. Okay. Myra gave him a pleading look. Time was of the essence. Without a word or warning, he grabbed the bastard and crashed his lips upon hers, but before they could get any hotter they pulled back and disappeared into the tent and its corridors. This was going to get more and more complicated, wasn't it? Almost 2 weeks later, Sansa sat singing to herself in a soft, near angelic tone. Pale icy blue eyes watched the waves of Blackwater Bay crash upon the shore. It was serene, with the full moon shimmering upon the rippling horizon. Boats and late-night fishermen flowed across the surface. Nighttime King's Landing bore a similar disposition. Few carts were creaking in the night, echoing against the near-empty streets. And who are you? The proud lord said, Sansa whispered as her eyes began to shut. That I must bow so low, only a cat of a different coat, that's all the truth. I know. Eyes shot around to the city below. Lannister banners had replaced many of the Baratheon ones, almost as if the Lannisters were the ruling house of the Seven Kingdoms. Lannister footmen marched up and down the streets, patrolling for any hidden threats and traitors to their king. Sansa smiled softly when her thoughts fell on Joffrey. When he'd returned from Crackclaw Point, he was wounded, a great scar across his chest and another marking his cheek. How he managed to survive was beyond her. She'd prayed and begged the gods even for the king to fall over and die, preferably on his own sword. Sansa bit back a laugh and resign to humming a sweet tune as she stitched away singing the Song of the Lannisters was her only way to gain Joffrey's trust and that of those around her if she was to become a Kingslayer and protect her family. While doing so, she was willing to go the distance. With her new training under her belt, she knew she'd put the sniveling king in his place. She wanted to slice him, dice him, stab and maim him, but that wasn't her style. She was going to leave the more violent actions to her little sister. No, Sansa was going to play the game that the lords and ladies so loved to play. She'd kill, but only if there was nothing to gain from the potential resource. Talks with Lord Baelish and Lord Varys had helped tremendously. She was slowly beginning to see the cogs and inner workings of King's Landing's court. Suddenly her sweet song came to a shuddering halt, and she shot to her feet. Slowly she traced her lithe and soft fingers against a golden chalice. It was filled with enough wine to make the queen happy. Sansa turned on her heels, raising the chalice to her lips, sipping softly, taking the wine and ignoring the soft sting. It was bitter and tasted horrible, but it helped just as smooth. She placed the chalice down and ran her hands across the tabletop, tracing her fingers along the length of the various utensils and objects. What do you gain from spying on me, sir? Sansa asked, breaking the silence. Don't think me a flower to be trampled and gifted. I am Sansa Stark of House Stark. I will not be toyed with any longer. Now you will answer my questions. She knelt, creasing the leather breeches she wore, meeting the tied and bloodied man sitting in a heavy chair. He was gagged and already had 2 knives embedded in his kneecaps. Thankfully Arya and her warging abilities caught a horrible whiff of this spy and pointed him out. Just an hour prior they beat him, cut him and finally tied him up for questioning, though in hindsight they should have done it in the opposite order. It was just that they were changing, and as bare as their name day when they caught him, anger took over and their dire wolves nearly tore him to shreds before he could spill whatever information he had. Luckily Sansa had a greater grip on her emotions and calmed Lady and Nymeria before Arya could take things any further, but that was in the past, and Sansa had already washed the blood from the man's wounds in her own hands. But she still had questions, and those questions required answers. With a sigh the Stark rose to her feet, hands resting at her hips. Are you uncomfortable? Sansa asked. Knives and the knees look horribly painful. The spy chose not to reply, as he did so many times before. He kept his eyes shut, probably still traumatized from Sansa's war guys. Sansa frowned and pulled up her own seat slowly. She trailed her knife across his skin and nearly giggled at how afraid he was of the cold sharp steel. Listening to all the fantasies Arya had that involved murdering Joffrey had corrupted Sansa in a way. For someone so young, Arya had a massive imagination when it came to ending someone's life, and quite a bit of it was transferred to Sansa. While water dancing was for self-defense, it was their own volition to use it in any way the saw fit. Arya chose to let the inner wild wolf free, and Sansa, she decided to be a deceitful fox. She kept her facade of innocence and blind love for Joffrey, but she knew better. It was a means to an end. She had to play the part given to her if she was going to survive long enough to get Arya and Bran out of King's Landing and back to Winterfell safe and sound. Please let me go, the man sputtered. Ah, so you have a voice? Sansa smiled. I promise to let you go if you give me the information I want. A deal is a deal, and on the honor of House Stark, I will uphold our agreement. I was sent by Lord Baelish, the man muttered. He has a middleman that deals with spies, and you lie? Sansa snarled. He would never betray my family to such an extent that he'd send someone to spy on me and my sister. No, you're trying to place the blame on someone else. No, please, my lady, I am not your lady, sir. Sansa, in a bout of rage, twisted one of the kneecap knives. Before he could scream, she shoved a rag into his mouth, effectively muffling him. Once he was silenced, she twisted and twisted until the skin had formed a mangled whirlpool formation. Blood spewed once more, covering his soaked breeches, and covered her hands. The knife had become slick. No fun in something that slips too much. She tore the blade from the man's knee and replaced it with yet another knife. Seemingly from out of nowhere, he yelped into the rag and jumped at the sudden puncture. Tell Sansa. The door burst open to reveal Arya and Nymeria, both visibly excited. What is it, Arya? Sansa asked with a glare. I'm busy still, Arya asked. Just kill him and be done with it. We have more important issues that need to be dealt with. Sansa was intrigued. Such as? Arya's smile grew even larger. Fox Company has returned. Naruto rode head of his troop, battered with flakes of blood still clinging to his wild blonde hair. At his hip his empty scabbard dangled free, slapping against the saddle of his mount at his sides in a wedge formation. Myra and Bran were on either side of him, followed by Maya and Gendry, with Summer in between them. Ser Delran and Lady Tarina followed behind the two bastards, with Jalabar and Brienne of Tarth riding in between them, holding the rear. The 5 knights rode steady, with Lady Sorsha acting as a buffer between them and the remaining forces of Fox Company. All of them were covered in flakes of blood and were ruffled with bruises and various cuts. They looked like they'd just been through a crucible of knives. Nonetheless, they rode like the very world was ending. Shouts echoed into the night as the gates creaked open at the sight of the Fox head banners. Lannister soldiers and Royal Army levies cheered on their arrival, but none of them were replied with the same sentiment. Naruto and Fox Company simply rode past the guards and the newly waking populace of Main Street. King's Landing. Their arrival wasn't projected to have such an impact, but Naruto was direly hoping that this wouldn't impede his movement. They rode ahead, keeping formation and forcing people to stay in their homes and alleys, giving the returning heroes a fair amount of room to maneuver. The Red Keep was where they needed to go. His grandfather was supposed to be there, preparing the defense of King's Landing in the event of an invasion by Stannis. Naruto slapped the reins of his horse, shooting in front of his battle companions, and raced along the cobblestone street, kicking dirt, mud, and muck into the air. Finally reaching the Red Keep, he dismounted and was met with some men who didn't appreciate his appearance. Without a second thought, the Baratheon scion shoved his knife into one of the guards, spraying blood onto the otherwise clean cobblestone road. The other guard was nearing to make a run for it, but a throwing knife embedded itself into his temple, paralyzing and killing the man immediately. He fell over comically before he could clash and make a massive scene. Summer came along and softened the man's descent to that of a peaceful thought. He was not in the mood to deal with annoying, close-minded fools. He had information that needed to be shared if they were going to have even a sliver of a chance of surviving the onslaught that Stannis now had at his disposal. Bran arrived, dismounting from his horse, and tossed Naruto an arming sword, all the while giving hushed orders to the men and women of Fox Company. Within seconds they had occupied the courtyard, and Naruto had full free rein to move about the castle. "You ready?" Bran asked, hand resting against the pommel of his sword. "I was born ready," Naruto smirked. "Let's get this done and over with." Naruto swung the grand doors of the keep, only to be met with a series of knights and confused levies. He waited for one of them to raise a sword at his direction. Any man willing to raise and contest Naruto, he was going to kill him where he stood. Myra and the rest of the battle companions filed into the corridor, filling the area with a deep, dark dread that could only be described as death. Immediately the knights and levies parted way for the hardened battle force. Naruto marched along, weaving through the hallways, leaving boot stains in the velvet carpets and stone floors. Some of the servants sighed in defeat, and the shiny fresh recruits were horrified of what the battle companions of Fox Company must have gone through. Naruto was so fixated on his march he didn't even take notice of the woman watching him with fearful eyes. And Naruto, he froze for a moment. Bran looked up and shook his head softly at Sansa, giving her all she needed to know. Lords and ladies of the court stared in an uncomfortable silence as this group of brutes and animals started to fill the corridor with an unruly stench. Mud, blood, death. The prince sighed and continued walking, boots squishing against the stone and carpets. Sansa's hands fell to her sides. "He didn't even look at me." It was well into the night, and the moon could no longer be seen. Too high in the cloudy sky it seemed across her room was a portrait of none other than Joffrey as her unofficial husband. Since they hadn't consummated the marriage, she was told it was a courtesy to have her husband's portrait in her room. Little did that foolish Septa know it served a different purpose. Target practice. Little by little the portrait was beginning to shred with how much she'd hurled knives and forks at it. She hated looking at Joffrey, and she hated being cooped up in the castle grounds like a hen waiting to lay her eggs. She wanted to walk and explore. She especially wanted to escape the prying eyes of Lords Baelish and Varys. She didn't know who to trust. Neither of them showed any form of ulterior motive in helping her understand the game, but not once did the spy waver from saying he worked for Lord Baelish. Of course there was the statement of a middleman that could help her expose Lord Baelish, but she couldn't learn of who this middleman was when she'd returned from seeing Naruto enter the castle. The man had somehow found a way to kill himself. There was a knife embedded in his throat, seeming to have punctured through his skin from within. The fool probably ate one of the knives on the tabletop. It was hard work removing such a heavy guy, but Lady was feeling depraved, and Sansa had to take care of her beautiful companion and friend. Lady sure ate well and cleaned well, but after her reminiscing ending she'd realized she'd run out of projectiles. Joffrey was beginning to look like a porcupine. Funny, she was already imagining such an image to appear before her. Joffrey covered in blood with an arsenal of arrows and bolts embedded in his weak body. She sighed, twisting in bed, letting her legs slide across the bed linen. She was in nothing but a sleeping gown, leaving the cold winds to embrace her like they did in Winterfell. Suddenly there was a heavy beating against her door. Sansa sprang to her feet, quickly grabbing a knife and hiding it in her sleeve. After learning of a spy in her chambers, she wasn't about to take any chances. She pressed her hand on the handle, knife poised to strike. "Who is it? Just open the door," the voice pleaded. "Please, Naruto.